A guy dies from overworking, gets reincarnated into a cultivation world, and decides he'll never lift a finger again. While everyone dreams of getting an overpowered system, he literally rejects his own system multiple times because it sounds like disguised slave labor. But the system becomes so desperate to get a host that it evolves into something completely ridiculous, an invincible laying down system. Yep, the protagonist literally gets stronger by breathing, relaxing, and doing absolutely nothing. The guy jumps straight into the Emperor realm without training, gains insane techniques while chilling under a tree, and even makes empresses, sects, and legendary cultivators kneel before him without understanding what's happening. And without further ado, let's get into the video because this is absolute cinema. A young man was lying in the middle of a forest under a tree, completely happy because he did not need to cultivate or fight in the palace, and he even had his own establishment. His life after being reborn in that world was extremely relaxing, exactly the way he liked it. Suddenly, a tiny woman appeared in front of him, saying that she was his spiritual assistant and that he needed to contact her to start his tasks. But the protagonist refused, saying that he did not want to and told her to go away. The poor thing became upset and asked why he was rejecting her, since she was there to help him dominate the world of cultivation. The young man looked at her and pointed out that he knew the nature of that kind of system and that she truly was impressive. However, the truth was that all of that was about endless torture, with those rankings and arrogant people everywhere. In his past life, he had worked himself to death, and now that he had come back to life, she wanted him to go back to working for a system again. And that was not going to happen. The spiritual assistant insisted, begging him to give her a chance and promising to work hard to improve. But the protagonist kept the same thought, saying that working was out of the question and that he would never work again in his entire life. His assistant became confused, asking if the host was rejecting her because she was not working hard enough, and if that meant she needed to become stronger. After evolving her system, she went to him again, saying that the strongest cheat system had been updated, and the required task for beginners was to bang their head against a wall. Because of that, he needed to get ready and bind himself to her to begin. But once again, the protagonist refused, saying that he had a fear of pain and that she needed to find someone else. He thought that he could not even have peace while relieving himself, and that system was being extremely annoying. She tried again with another update, telling him to bind himself to her, enter the gate of the spiritual sword sect, and receive exclusive rewards. He refused again, asking how that was any different from clocking in at work. The spiritual assistant became upset, wondering why she was always being rejected, and the only conclusion was that she was not working hard enough. She decided to try one more time and ran over to him, but the protagonist interrupted her before she could say anything, saying that he did not even want to hear it. But his spiritual assistant said that this time, the system had been upgraded into the best invincible lying down system. He only needed to bind himself to her to receive countless rewards. This caught his attention, and the protagonist asked if he had heard correctly and if the system was only about lying down. She said yes, because that was the best invincible lying down system. After the two of them bound themselves together, he would become invincible in the cultivation world just by lying down. The protagonist said that this really was impressive and asked if she was not trying to trick him into binding himself, only to then make him work himself to death like a fat pig. His assistant raised her hand, saying that it was an oath and that if she deceived him, she would freeze because of an error. The protagonist thought that the system really did seem very sincere and that maybe he should give it a try. He told her that he would agree and trust her this time. As soon as the two began the binding, she congratulated the host because he had successfully bound himself to the system and, because of that, had received his first reward, Emperor Potential. He was currently in the mortal Emperor state, initial stage. The protagonist was impressed and asked if he had really understood correctly because, apparently, he had jumped straight from the mortal realm to the Emperor realm. His spiritual assistant continued announcing, saying that it had been detected that the host was breathing, so he would immediately receive a realm advancement as a reward and a primordial Tao fruit. He went from the initial Emperor stage to the second Emperor stage. The protagonist continued to be surprised because just by breathing, he had already advanced an entire realm, and this really was an invincible lying down system. He began releasing an absurd amount of energy and shouted, saying that he was already at the second Emperor stage, so he no longer needed to hold himself back. That amount of energy was so overwhelming that kilometers away, inside a city, it caught everyone's attention. One of the young men felt that tremor and asked what was happening, and whether the spiritual sect was perhaps about to face a disaster. Another young man ordered them to immediately ring the bell to summon the 9 souls and gather all the elders in the main hall for an emergency meeting, since the power being displayed belonged to a new emperor who had just appeared, and the last time that happened was 500 years ago. Because of that, they needed to quickly investigate which sect or school this new emperor belonged to. In Xuanji Palace in the Great Shang Dynasty, they shouted that they had just glimpsed the secret of the heavens and needed to report to the empress immediately. This new emperor's name was Wang Yang, and he was in the spiritual sword sect. Everyone, let's change the system's name to Tang Ping. Yang was sitting there saying that if things had been this good in his past life, it would have been much better because he had lived 26 years without even holding a girl's hand. His assistant appeared saying that she had detected that the host wanted to find a Tao companion so she could display the available targets at that moment. The protagonist was impressed, asking if the invincible system could help with that too. Ying said that she had filtered the most interesting targets for him so he could choose. But the protagonist said that it did not work that way because they did not need to talk about which one he would choose, since he had to win them over, and that was too much work. Ying asked him not to forget to claim his rewards from the Tao Companion mission. Yang became a little confused and asked the system to wait a moment because he had not even gone after anyone yet, so why did he already have a reward? But suddenly, news arrived that Empress Ye Linlang of the Great Shang Dynasty was requesting an audience with Emperor Yang. Meanwhile, in the palace, the person leading the meeting asked Elder Bai Fang if the sect had any elder named Wang Yang. Fang pointed out that he had never heard of him. Besides, he had read the records of the entire sect and found no one with that name. The other man beside him explained that perhaps the protagonist was some disciple who had not been registered in the spiritual sword sect. One of the young men present said that he had just remembered that the ancestral founder had a master named Wang. Fang stood up and shouted, saying that it made perfect sense, and that this Wang Yang was probably the true ancestral founder, who had been hiding his identity and protecting the spiritual sword sect until now. The person leading the meeting asked Chang Feng to go welcome the empress, while the rest of the spiritual sect had to follow him to greet the ancestor on their knees. A short time later, they went to the protagonist, and everyone knelt down, greeting the founding ancestor. The protagonist became a little confused and asked Ying if this was also some kind of system reward. She explained that this was spontaneous behavior and was not related to the system. He thinks that in that case, he will just let things flow and asks everyone to stand up, as they do not need to be so formal. The leader of the group, calling the protagonist the founding ancestor, says that the empress of the Shang dynasty wishes to speak with him, asking if he knows why, and the protagonist replies that she is probably there to propose marriage. The woman who was with the group is surprised, asking how that is possible, while other members of the group say that it is shocking and ask if they heard correctly, stating that there is no precedent for such a thing. Yang looked at all of them and said that the empress was there, so he should go greet her. Meanwhile, somewhere else, the empress was sitting in a chair, asking if it was possible that the new emperor did not want to meet her. Chang Feng said that the founder had been meditating behind the mountains, so she only needed to wait a moment, and he should arrive soon. The protagonist arrived, and the empress noticed that his aura and clothing did not resemble those of a legendary emperor. This made her think that perhaps the prophecy of the royal council was wrong. The protagonist realized that he had completely forgotten to change before meeting the empress. He asked Ying to give him an impressive set of equipment because he needed to improve his image. Ying said that she had just detected that the meeting task had been completed, and the reward he had received was a set of imperial dragon armor. Lin Lang was impressed by the new outfit and thought that the protagonist was indeed an emperor, and that his realm was far higher than hers. She bowed before him and introduced herself, saying that her name was Lin Lang and that she was the empress. She was there to humbly ask him to save the great Shang dynasty. The protagonist was surprised, wondering if she was the same empress who had conquered the 6 nations. He asked her to rise and said that he understood the difficulties she was going through. However, he pointed out that he had lived in seclusion for years, precisely to avoid worldly matters. But the empress continued insisting and said that if the protagonist could save the great dynasty, she would accept any condition. The young man from before thought that the empress was making a great sacrifice. Even so, the protagonist was still a little reluctant to accept. Lin Lang noticed this and said that if the emperor did not mind, she could offer herself to him. Fang and the young man beside him were impressed because the empress was offering herself, and this was the biggest news in the cultivation world. Yang thought that although he was tempted by the empress's offer, accepting it might still bring him many problems in the future. Ying informed her master that the empress possessed the extremely rare and immortal phoenix physique. The protagonist, still confused, asked the system if there was anything special about it. Ying explained that if a cultivator engaged in dual cultivation with someone who possessed the immortal phoenix physique, he would instantly advance an entire realm. Yang remained thoughtful because, even with great risks, she continued insisting and had made an oath to the heavenly Tao. So if she went back on her word, she would suffer the wrath of the heavens. She thought that, on top of all that, the protagonist was an extremely talented person, so she did not mind making that sacrifice. Yang took a deep breath and agreed, saying that if that was the case, then she could show him the way because he was getting an empress as a wife for free, and he did not know where else he could find an offer as good as that. Lin Lang knelt once again, saying that on behalf of the billions of citizens of the great dynasty, she thanked the emperor. The young man told the protagonist that the spiritual sword sect could not survive without him, because if their enemies took advantage of that situation, it would be an unprecedented catastrophe. Ying detected that the sect master was asking for the host's help. The protagonist agreed to help, and the system congratulated him for obtaining the Imperial-grade array formation, 9 Heavens Spiritual Swords. Yang thought that the system really was very generous because it was offering him an Imperial-grade array. He created the formation in his hand and the sect master was impressed. The protagonist explained that this was the 9 Heavens spiritual formation. When activated, it would guarantee the sect's safety. He activated the array and the sword flew out over the entire place. Several other swords began to appear and all of them created a shield around the entire sect. Everyone was impressed because that was an Imperial-grade formation. With this, the spiritual sword sect would rise to greatness once again, because the ancestral master's abilities were beyond imagination. Lin Lang watched and thought that those 9 Heavens spiritual swords were stronger than the defense of the Imperial Order, and it seemed that the founder of the spiritual sword sect truly was impressive. Qing Yao knelt in front of the protagonist and begged him to allow her to serve by his side. The protagonist looked at the Empress, who did not have a very happy expression after hearing that. He thought that yet another girl was throwing herself at him, and apparently that place was turning into a battlefield and becoming more and more difficult. Ying congratulated her master again, saying that Liu Qingyao also possessed the rare resonance spiritual physique, which only appeared once every 10,000 years. He asked the system to explain what was special about that resonance spiritual physique. Ying said that a person with that sacred body was loyal, reliable, attentive, and shared a deep connection with their masters. Yang said that sounded more like the sacred body of a maid. Ying said that this was only expected of the host because his evaluation was correct. He accepted her, saying that from that moment on she would stay by his side. Qingyao was happy with that news and thanked the ancestral master deeply. The protagonist began laughing and thought that having a maid by his side was not bad at all. The sect master thought that, as expected, the ancestral master still valued old relationships, and with that, Qingyao's future would be limitless. The Empress asked where the Phoenix carriage was. Suddenly, the carriage began flying overhead and the people were impressed because that was a legendary immortal-grade vehicle, the Rainbow Phoenix carriage. That treasure was on the same level as an Emperor-grade item, which made it even more impressive. Yang stared at it and thought that the treasures of the cultivation world were incredibly beautiful. Now that he stopped to think about it, he had never bought a car in his past life. Ying detected that the host desired a vehicle and congratulated him for obtaining a carriage. Suddenly, a carriage with several guards appeared. That was the 6 Imperial Dragon's carriage. As soon as the carriage stopped, the 2 guards greeted their new master. The people could not believe that this was the legendary Emperor-grade carriage. Yang asked his future wife and empress to enter first. As soon as the 3 of them boarded the carriage, Yang said that they needed to leave immediately for the great Shang dynasty. Meanwhile, a woman was trying to maintain the array, asking everyone to calm their minds, because even if it cost them all their cultivation, they needed to hold on until Her Majesty returned. However, most of the residents were in a panic, shouting for everyone to run immediately because the Xuanwei Empire was about to break through the array. Outside, 2 cultivators were trying to break the array. Jiang Yunqi, one of the 4 generals of Xuanyue, complained, saying that the formation seemed weak, but they could not break it, and that was frustrating. Song Tiayi, another member of the 4 generals, pointed out that he had not expected the Empress to have such formidable tactics. Yunqi was confused and asked why he was saying that. Tiayi explained that the Empress had reduced the range to the surroundings of the capital, which strengthened the Imperial defense array. He asked Yunqi to keep attacking the array while he dealt with the rest. The woman from before was already reaching her limit and apologized to Her Majesty, but that was the most she could hold. Tiayi activated Dragon Ascension to attack, but the 2 of them were surprised when they felt an extremely powerful sword aura. They looked up, and the protagonist was preparing to counterattack. Yunqi asked who the idiot was that dared to interfere in their affairs. Tiayi, on the other hand, became a little frightened and showed respect because he saw 6 dragons pulling the carriage. That meant the person inside had to be extremely powerful. Politely, he asked if he could know who the person before them was. Lin Lang introduced the protagonist, saying that he was Emperor Wang Yang of the Spiritual Sword Sect. Yunchi continued acting arrogantly, asking what sect that was because he had never heard of it and it must be nothing more than a tiny third-rate sect. Qingyao became furious at that comment and shouted, asking how he dared to insult the spiritual sword sect. Yunchi replied that a brat at the nascent soul stage had no right to speak as an equal with those in the Emperor realm. Ying told the protagonist that, because his sect had been insulted, the host had been rewarded with the Saint-grade art, stellar technique of heaven and earth. Yang began laughing and asked why the two of them did not do him a favor. Yungchi, still irritated, shouted at the protagonist asking who he thought he was to talk about favors with them. But Tie, who had already realized what was in front of them, asked his companion to calm down and called the protagonist fellow cultivator, saying that they were there under orders to take the Empress, so he would like to politely ask him not to interfere in that matter. Yang released his aura and asked what would happen if he refused to accept that. Ying sensed the increase in the host's killing intent, and because of that he received a reward. The stellar technique of heaven and earth had reached its maximum level of mastery. Tiai said that if that was the case, then they could not be blamed for acting ruthlessly. Yang asked Ying to explain what the stellar technique of heaven and earth did. She said that this technique could absorb attacks from the same realm and then reflect them with twice the power. After learning how his technique worked, the protagonist looked at the two of them and said that they were not worthy of making him move, so he would stand still there and let them make 3 moves. If they managed to even touch his body, then they could do whatever they wanted with the Empress. Lin Lang became worried and asked what the Emperor was planning to do. Qingyao also asked her master not to be so reckless because those two were truly strong. But the protagonist interrupted both of them, telling them to be quiet and not worry, because those two would not be able to do absolutely anything to him. Yunqi prepared to attack, saying that if the protagonist could withstand at least 3 blows, then they would leave. Yang told them to begin. Yunqi tried to attack, however, he realized that something strange had happened, because 90% of his power had disappeared as if it were nothing, which showed that this guy had some skills. However, he did not let himself be intimidated by that and tried to attack again, using the terrifying God Fist third form, Dragon Fist breaking the void. The attack was truly powerful, but once again, it did absolutely nothing to the protagonist. Yang asked if that was all they had to show and if the realm they were in was merely status. Yungqi became even more furious, feeling humiliated. Tiai told his companion not to use any more moves, however, it was already too late. Yungqi transformed using the Heavenly King enchantment, Divine Buddha Palm. The protagonist activated the stellar technique of Heaven and Earth Dharma Body. Yungqi landed a direct blow. Qingyao realized that her ancestral master was truly very powerful. The Empress pointed out that he had taken a powerful attack from an emperor using a Dharma body, which meant that perhaps his strength could be beyond the emperor realm. Yang activated the reversal and Yungqi received twice the damage he had inflicted, nearly falling into a coma instantly. Tiai rushed over to hold his companion, but Yungqi kept trying to fight, saying that Guy had definitely used some tricks, so he refused to accept this defeat and emphasized that he wanted to try 3 more blows. Tiai asked him to stop being reckless, because his body had already suffered absurd damage. Yang walked over to the two of them, saying that Yungqi had already failed his attempt, so Tiai could try. Tiai refused, thanked the protagonist for showing mercy, and emphasized that the two of them would keep their previous word and withdraw immediately. As soon as the two left, Qingyao asked if her master was hurt, but he told her not to worry, explaining that he was fine and had not suffered any injuries. The Empress praised him, saying that the technique he had just used was phenomenal. Yang thanked her and explained that it was nothing to him. Lin Lang emphasized that the great dynasty was now indebted to the emperor's kindness, so she was very grateful. They would have a banquet later at the imperial palace, and she would like to have the honor of their presence. Yang said that since it was a direct invitation from the empress, there was no way he could refuse. As soon as the two went inside the sect, everyone went to welcome the empress. She explained that the protagonist was Emperor Wang Yang of the spiritual sword sect, and that he would soon be crowned as the great sovereign of the great Shang dynasty. They were shocked by this news, and after learning that the protagonist would become sovereign, everyone knelt and greeted His Majesty and the new king. But Yang, still lost, asked the system what exactly the position of sovereign was. Ying congratulated him for accepting the work of the people of the great dynasty, and because of that he had earned merit points. Yang became irritated with Ying and asked what merit points were and whether she had secretly added some kind of mission to the system without telling him, because if she did not tell him the truth immediately, he would find some way to unbind himself from her. Ying became frightened and said that there was nothing like that, but the protagonist remained angry with her and ordered her to immediately explain what merit points were, because in the normal cultivation world, no such thing existed. Ying asked him to calm down a little and let her explain everything clearly. The protagonist let her go, and she began explaining that merit points were generated by admiration and working for others. Doing good deeds, saving lives, or serving the country, all of that would bring merit points. Yang asked if that meant being a good person already made him even stronger, because if that really was the result, why would he need to work? Ying continued explaining that gathering a large amount of wishes was not easy, but kings and high-ranking officials, because they were respected, could gain merits quickly. And if he used merits to form a Dharma body, he could become stronger than the nascent soul realm from the very beginning. The protagonist finally understood and looked at the Empress, saying that apparently she had formed her Dharma body through merits. Ying said no because the Empress was a rare dual cultivator. Linlong noticed that he was a little too serious and asked if he did not like the capital. The protagonist said that was not it, because he was only remembering the past. He thought that the value of that Empress kept increasing more and more. As they walked through the capital, all the residents kept wishing them long life and kneeling, because that mysterious expert had saved the capital and had an immortal aura. Qingyao kept looking at her new master and thought that he was very handsome, so she should stay by his side, even if it was only as a servant. Suddenly, a man knelt near the Empress and she became irritated. The man said that the Grand Counselor was being sent back to the Heavenly Secret Pavilion. Yang calmed Linlong, asking why they did not visit the Grand Counselor first. She apologized for losing her composure. The woman who had been maintaining the array earlier was the Grand Counselor. Several people were gathered around her bed, begging her not to leave them and emphasizing that she could not remain injured. The Empress opened the door, apologizing to her master, saying that she had arrived too late. The counselor looked at the Empress and asked how many more times she would have to ask her to call her Grand Counselor in public. The protagonist looked at her and thought that it was truly a pity for such a beautiful woman to die like that. The counselor thanked Yang for saving the Empress and the entire dynasty. Lin Lang shouted for everyone to summon the immortal doctor to heal the Grand Counselor immediately. But the counselor refused, saying there was no need to do that because, in her current condition, only a 9-cycle rebirth pill from the superior immortal realm could save her. Ying appeared once again, saying that she had detected that someone needed treatment, so the host would receive that supreme-grade 9-cycle rebirth pill. The protagonist emphasized that the system knew very well how to cause trouble. He held the pill in his hand and hesitated, wondering whether he should keep that pill or use it immediately to try to save that woman's life. Yang asked the Empress not to be sad because he had the pill they needed to save her. He thought that saving lives came first and that it would be a pity for a beauty like that to die. Lin Lang was flattered, saying that the pill was extremely valuable, so she would like to thank him again. The other two were happy to see that their master would be saved. As soon as Lin Lang placed the pill in the Grand Counselor's mouth, she woke up, and an exponential energy began to grow inside her body. The protagonist was impressed because that pill truly had special effects, and it was no wonder it could only be found in the superior immortal realm. Lin Lang asked her master if she was all right because, apparently, she had advanced a realm. The counselor went over to the protagonist and thanked him, saying that thanks to the pill he had bestowed upon her, she had not only healed all her injuries, but had also advanced to the intermediate stage of the Immortal King realm. Young asked her not to mention it because it was only a simple matter and there was no need to cause so much trouble. Suddenly, another person entered the room, telling the Empress that the banquet was ready. Lin Lang asked Yang to join them at the banquet. A short time later, already seated at the table, he was a little worried because he had not drunk alcohol since being reborn in that world, so he wanted to know how strong that drink could be. Ying said that she had just detected that the host would drink alcohol, so he needed to receive the Emperor-grade technique called the Wine Dragon Qi technique. This technique converted alcohol, medicinal potency, or poison into true qi, greatly increasing the body's reaction speed. The protagonist was happy because now he could drink and eat without worrying. The Empress stood up, saying that this first cup of wine came from herself and the Heavenly Secret Pavilion, thanking the Emperor for the pill that saved the Grand Counselor. She drank the wine and said that with this second cup of wine on behalf of all the citizens of the Great Dynasty, she would toast the Great Emperor, thanking him for saving the Great Dynasty. And with the third, she would toast the Emperor once more because from now on he would be the sovereign of the Great Shang Dynasty. The citizens present were shocked because sovereign meant exactly that. Even if it was sudden, it meant that the Great Dynasty would have 2 experts in the Emperor realm, so no one would dare look down on them again in the future. Linlong asked everyone to be silent because she had already spoken with the Grand Counselor to choose a specific day for her wedding with the protagonist. Qingyao interrupted the Empress, saying that this was a major event and could not be rushed like that. Lin Lang emphasized that she had made a heavenly oath not to marry anyone other than Emperor Yang. So what right did she, a mere junior, have to oppose that decision? Qingyao stood firm and shouted at the empress, explaining that she was not opposing her marriage to her master. However, she wanted to emphasize that weddings required proper rituals and ceremonies. If the great Shang dynasty handled everything, it would make it seem as if the spiritual sword sect was neglecting the ancestral master. Meanwhile, the protagonist simply sat there, drinking his wine and thinking that watching two beauties argue was very entertaining. So that trip had been well worth it. Ying warned that she had detected that the protagonist was about to get married, so she was preparing a special wedding gift. Yang told the system to shut up and emphasized that the wedding had not even been confirmed yet, so why was she in such a hurry? Suddenly, someone entered the hall saying that he had heard an expert had arrived in the great Shang dynasty, so the left prime minister of the Xuanyue dynasty, named Qi Wenyuan, was there to meet him. The empress stood up in fright, saying that she had not expected them to send Prime Minister Qi Wenyuan, because apparently the heavens wanted the great Shang dynasty to perish. The protagonist asked what the cultivation level was of the prime minister they were talking so much about. The counselor explained that the Xuanyue dynasty had existed for 1,000 years. Currently, they have one emperor, two ministers, and four generals, totaling 7 experts in the emperor realm. This Qi Wenyuan is one of the ministers, known as the left minister. Yang remained calm, saying that Guy was only at the emperor level, so why were they panicking so much? Lin Lang explained that this man was not frightening because of his strength, but because he was the #1 strategist of the Xuanyue dynasty, since he was a master of planning and never failed his missions. He could destroy nations, or save them with just a thought. Yang asked Ying what Qi Wenyuan's true realm was. She apologized, however. She explained that this was not within her detection range, so she could not obtain that information. The protagonist told her not to worry because he was sure they would soon meet this person. However, no one entered the hall. The protagonist said that perhaps that expert did not want to meet him or was looking down on him. Lin Lang asked the protagonist to leave immediately because he should not involve himself any further in Sheng's worldly affairs. Because if this continued, perhaps she would only be able to repay her debt in her next life. The counselor reprimanded the empress, saying that she should not do that kind of thing because if she let the protagonist leave, then the billions of citizens in that place would fall into eternal damnation. Qingyao warned her master that Xuanyue was truly no joke and asked why they did not return to the spiritual sword sect immediately. The protagonist said that he had barely managed to drink his second cup of wine and someone was already there to cause trouble, and this was becoming unbearable. He stood up to speak with the empress, but the counselor stepped forward and knelt down, saying that national ruler Yang was truly compassionate for saving the great Shang dynasty at that critical moment. Everyone began to worship him, saying that his benevolence was incomparable, a true fortune for the great Shang dynasty, and a blessing for its people. Yang thought that he had been too slow and now there was nothing else he could do. The empress reprimanded all her people, saying that the emperor was only a guest. So how could they force him to defend everyone like that? Yang told her not to be angry because since it was the prime minister, he could not trouble him and he would be back soon. Lin Lang was happy, saying that there was no way to repay such great kindness, so they could only await the great emperor's triumphant return. Meanwhile, outside the array, Wenyuan was tired of waiting and prepared to attack, saying that it seemed this place preferred to suffer rather than cooperate. He was about to attack, but the protagonist approached, asking him to wait a moment. Wenyuan asked the protagonist if he was Emperor Wang Yang. The protagonist said that he was only a small cultivator unworthy of the left minister's attention. Wenyuan was impressed and thought that the protagonist had destroyed Yungqi's incredible martial arts body with one move, yet he seemed very humble, which showed that he was an extremely strong person. He looked at the protagonist and told him that he seemed very humble and very strong at the same time. Because of that, he would like to invite him to go to the Xuanyue dynasty, because if he agreed to join them, then the protagonist would have a status equal to Wenyuan's. But Yang refused, saying that unfortunately he was only a rude man from the mountains, so he could not accept a generous salary from the upper ranks. Besides, Yang emphasized that Wenyuan also seemed to be a very sensible person, so he also knew there was no need to damage the relationship between Xuanyue and Sheng. Wenyuan said that Empress Lin Lang had destroyed 6 kingdoms in a row, eliminating many people, so they were only defending justice. The protagonist agreed. However, he emphasized that although the unification of the 6 countries had been very fierce, there had been no war since then, and that was a great merit. Wenyuan praised the protagonist, saying that he had excellent dialogue and a good mind. However, he had received an order to arrest the empress and take her away. Yang emphasized that he respected Wenyuan greatly as a person. However, on that day, They would only talk about pleasant matters and would not create conflict. Wen Yuan explained that conflict between the two nations was inevitable, but if the protagonist had any other solution, he could feel free to speak. Yang agreed, saying that a battle between gentlemen did not necessarily need to be fought with swords, but also with words. Wen Yuan pointed out that if the protagonist lost using words, he could not later say that it was unfair. However, the protagonist was already thinking that later, he would use Chinese poetry to defeat his opponent. Wen Yuan created a game, saying that they could make a bet, and if the protagonist happened to win, then he promised that he would no longer deal with the Empress's matter. But Yang realized that his opponent was not acting with common sense, because he did not know how to play Go. This game is an abstract strategy board game for two players, whose objective is to surround more territory than the opponent. Ying warned that the protagonist was preparing to play Go, so the AlphaGo system had been activated. Yang asked if this system was the same one used to play games on Earth. She said yes, but this was an authentic and updated version. With that, he could defeat the best players in the world, even with a 3-stone handicap. A handicap is a form of betting that gives an advantage or disadvantage to one of the competitors. After hearing that, the protagonist felt a little more relieved, saying that now his skills could dominate the world. He accepted the challenge, saying that in this case it was very difficult to back down, and asked Wen Yuan to make the first move. Wen Yuan asked if the protagonist was really going to give him the first move. Yang asked who had said he would only give him the first move and emphasized that he could make 2 moves ahead. Wen Yuan felt a little embarrassed and asked if the protagonist was trying to insult him, because his skills in that game were known throughout all the realms. Yang focused and emphasized that the words of a gentleman could not be taken back, so if his opponent won, he would accept any punishment. Wen Yuan agreed and put his sword into the wager, saying that if he lost, then that Mo Yun Tianzu's sword would belong to the protagonist, and he would leave immediately. Ying warned that the system was loading the game data. A short time later, the system counted the number of white moves and deduced that the percentage was at a 99.9% chance of victory. The protagonist was impressed, seeing that the system truly was very intelligent, and apparently, he really could win this. Meanwhile, the residents were watching that scene, asking if the emperor was really playing Go with the left prime minister, because this was madness since it was impossible to win. When Wen Yuan played alone against the Xuanyue dynasty, he defeated all 18 national players, so his strength in that game was truly terrifying. The Empress reprimanded everyone who was commenting on it, telling them not to say anything else, because the Emperor would return triumphant, and that was a fact. Qingyao thought that the ancestral master might even win that game, which showed that he was very versatile. The counselor was still a little frightened because the protagonist was facing a top-tier player and had even given him a 2-piece advantage. This was unprecedented, but she hoped nothing would go wrong. Meanwhile, in the game, Wen Yuan was incredulous, because every move the protagonist made contained extraordinary skill. Yang was satisfied because it was exactly as the rumors said. He was being dominant, and a novice like him could easily surpass experts. Wen Yuan still could not believe that even with a 2-stone advantage, he was losing, which showed that the protagonist's chess skills were incomparable. The people remained anxious, asking why the minister had not sent any signal yet, because perhaps he was too addicted to that game. But the truth was that Wen Yuan was already cornered, not knowing what to do, because the protagonist was predicting every step he took. Besides, he did not know why the protagonist's mind was not in that game, and perhaps he already knew what was happening. Yang made his next move and said that now the game had come to an end, thanking him very much for giving him this honorable opportunity for the two of them to face each other. Wen Yuan kept questioning how that was possible because he had lost even with a 2-stone advantage. Yang became a little scared by his opponent's reaction. He thought that this was just a game, so there was no need for him to act like that since it was only a game and there was no need for so much drama. Ying congratulated the protagonist, saying that through the game his opponent's soul had been damaged and his realm had fallen to the Immortal King realm. Yang became confused, asking why it seemed like something was wrong. She explained that there had been an error and the rewards could not be obtained. The protagonist asked if this was some kind of joke and if she was trying to make him laugh himself to death. Yang thanked his opponent again for the game. Suddenly, Tiayi and another man appeared, attempting a sneak attack. A great explosion occurred, however. The protagonist had created a shield to protect himself, so he did not suffer a single scratch. The bearded man explained that there was definitely a turtle shell protecting the protagonist, so they needed to try again from another angle. They tried to attack again, but the protagonist lost his patience and explained that they were seeking death, so he should not be judged for acting rudely. With the stellar technique of heaven and earth, he threw the two of them back and began releasing even more power. The bearded man was impressed, questioning how that was possible. Wen Yuan interrupted the two of them and said that was enough, ordering them to step back immediately. He apologized to the protagonist, saying that he had overestimated his own abilities, and thanked him for teaching him a lesson. Because of that, they would honor their promise and leave immediately. Young thanked him for his understanding and said they would see each other next time, but there was no need to say goodbye. The bearded man became irritated and asked why the left minister had not joined them to eliminate that threat to his majesty. Wen Yuan emphasized that Yang was incomprehensible and that his abilities might have reached the realm of the Tao of strategy. The bearded man remained confused, asking what was so great about being incredible at a game like Go. Wen Yuan explained that this could be the realm of a sage of the heavenly Tao and asked what he thought that meant. The bearded man was surprised and said that was basically impossible. But Wen Yuan already knew what he was facing, so he needed to return immediately and persuade his majesty not to put a target on the Shang dynasty. If they angered that man, the consequences would be terrible and unimaginable. While the protagonist was returning to the capital, Ying was shouting that she was going to come out while trembling. The protagonist found that a little strange and thought that maybe she had a stomachache. But suddenly she created a crystal, saying that it was finally refined. Yang asked what that crystal was because it did not seem like much. Ying explained that the fragment belonged to the heavenly Tao, and that no matter how exceptional a cultivator's talent was, if he did not understand the fragment of the heavenly Tao, he could not become a Tao sage. The protagonist accepted the explanation and began trying to comprehend that fragment. The amount of energy was so great that a man several kilometers away sensed an extremely powerful aura. He wondered if that could be a fragment of the heavenly Tao. However, the struggle for the great Tao had not begun yet, so how could a fragment have appeared? This made him worried because if a fragment of the heavenly Tao was appearing in the world, then an era of turmoil was certainly about to fall upon them. Another girl began wondering who would claim that fragment because this had been a very long wait. Two other people were also commenting on it. One of them asked if the appearance of the fragment was a trap set by his companion. However, his companion explained that the fragment was the path to becoming a sage, so why would he give up something like that? Meanwhile, the protagonist had been taken somewhere else. He asked what kind of environment that was. The system explained that this was the heavenly Tao altar inside the sea of his consciousness. The fragment's place was at the center of the disc, and in that way, the protagonist would be able to activate its power. Yang threw the fragment onto the altar and it fit perfectly. An overwhelming wave of qi began to emanate from it. He began leveling up rapidly, reaching the path of strategy, 9th rank, hidden wisdom. The protagonist was impressed because not only had his realm evolved, but he had also gained a new level of the heavenly Tao. Ying explained that the 9th rank, hidden wisdom, granted 3 black stones and 3 white stones, and using each one guaranteed different opportunities. The protagonist remained confused, asking what those opportunities were and whether that was for internal or external players, so the system needed to be a little more specific. Ying continued the explanation, saying that it was not for internal or external players. Now that he was a game master, he could use those stones to help or hinder others. Yang said that the game master sounded impressive. Ying continued saying that a game master used the world as a board, all people became pieces, and everything within his reach. Yang interrupted her, telling her to get straight to the point and asking if he had any other power besides playing Go. She explained that currently he was immune to enemy suppression techniques from the same realm and could nullify Emperor realm suppression from supreme beings. Yang was not very happy about that because the protagonists in the works he had always read eliminated their opponents across all realms, so the ability was not very good. He returned to the city and the Empress ran over to him saying that she had never thought his Go skills would be so magnificent, which showed that her husband was truly revealing. Yang explained that Wen Yuan's heart had been damaged because he lost the match, so his realm had fallen to Immortal King, and he would not cause trouble for the great Shang dynasty for a good while. Once again, all the people began applauding and wishing long life to the new lord. Lin Lang asked someone to bring more wine immediately, because she wanted to toast the sovereign's triumphant return. He picked up one of his pieces and tossed it upward. This caused the array to be strengthened. Ying congratulated him for strengthening the Imperial Protection Array and establishing a connection with it. The system's reward was a sacred-grade sword technique called Sword of the Nine Tribulations. The Grand Counselor noticed that something was happening and asked why it seemed like the Imperial Protection Array had changed. The protagonist finally understood how the White Stones worked. They could turn everyone into pieces, and that meant he could control others. He imagined his wife wearing some other clothes, asking him if those clothes were a little embarrassing. Yang asked the Grand Counselor to remain calm and explained that he had just upgraded the Imperial Protection Array. Unless an expert from the Supreme Realm arrived, that array would resist all external enemies. They thought that the Imperial Protection Array had indeed been strengthened, and that apparently the Emperor was incomprehensible, something no one could explain. Meanwhile, in the other dynasty, a man was drinking some wine and said that no one could have thought that even the calculating left minister would lose. A report was delivered to His Majesty saying that the powerful expert named Yang, whom Empress Linlang had invited, was incredibly strong. Because of that, he hoped His Majesty would temporarily stop his actions against the great Shang dynasty. He was Emperor Zhuan. He became furious and punched the table, shouting that that dynasty was very small and yet they could not even handle this. He ordered them to immediately summon the right minister and have her destroy the great Shang dynasty at once. However, the man remained worried, asking the emperor not to do that because this was now a crucial moment in the north, so he should not ruin a major plan because of a moment of anger. Xuan Yue emphasized that nothing was more important than capturing the empress, and if they could not do it, he would personally lead the army to annihilate that Shang dynasty. Meanwhile, in Shang, everyone was cheering for the protagonist, saying that he was the wisest and most powerful lord because he had frightened away the enemy with a simple game, in addition to possessing divine and incomparable skills, expelling the forces of the Xuan Yue dynasty with a single move. The counselor told the empress and the protagonist that she had made some calculations, and that in 5 days it would be an auspicious day for the wedding, so she suggested starting the preparations. Lin Lang became a little embarrassed and asked the imperial counselor if she was not being too hasty with the preparations. Since this was an important event, they should first have the Lord's approval. Yang thought that one of them was embarrassed and the other was pale, which made him wonder if he really had any choice. He decided to speak and said that, for this wedding, he could return to the spiritual sword sect to make the preparations. Lin Lang said that he did not need to worry about the wedding preparations because the imperial counselor could take care of everything. Qingyao interfered again, telling the empress and the imperial counselor that they could handle everything inside the Shang dynasty. But the ancestral master still needed to return and prepare the dowry and the welcoming ceremony. Lin Lang agreed because the new lord had just mentioned that this would also be a major event for the spiritual sword sect, so proper preparations needed to be made for that occasion. However, she was still a little worried that the customs of the spiritual sword sect might be different from what the Shang dynasty usually did. She asked the counselor if this could become a problem for the ceremony. The counselor said that the Lord's plan was to return to the spiritual sword sect, so she would like to go with him, because she was the imperial counselor of the great Shang dynasty and was very versatile in wedding preparations. The protagonist thought that this was his first time getting married in that world, so it would be very helpful to bring an expert along with him. He agreed and said that she could go with him to his sect. Before they left, the empress went to the exit and told her new lord that she would miss him greatly, so she wished she could return to the spiritual sword sect with him. Yang laughed and asked why she needed to miss him, because in 5 days they would get married and he would take her home. Lin Lang said that actually she was not ready yet. He asked what she was talking about and questioned whether she meant being his bride or having children. She became embarrassed and asked him to stop making those jokes. It was already getting late, so he needed to leave. As soon as they entered the carriage, the counselor emphasized that the imperial carriage was impressive. Qingyao explained that this was because the Lord was a legendary figure. However, the counselor thought that even a supreme being did not have such a magnificent carriage. So what kind of extraordinary figure could that guy be? She decided to try to find out something and told him that she was a little curious, so she would like to know which holy land he came from. Yang asked Ying what holy lands existed in that world. The system said that he had asked the right person because there were 10 holy lands in that world. She began naming them, but the protagonist said that was enough. However, he thought that if he said he was affiliated with one of those holy lands, he would have problems in the future, so it was better to simply say that he was a cultivator on his own. He explained to her that he was only a solo cultivator and had never belonged to any of the holy lands. The counselor was impressed, saying that she would never have imagined he was a solo cultivator because his talent and fortune were truly terrifying. Ying warned the protagonist that they were in big trouble because the array protecting the spiritual sword sect was under attack. This made the protagonist irritated and he questioned who the idiots were that were attacking while he was away. The counselor noticed that the protagonist had become a little more serious and asked if something had happened. He said it was nothing, because his sect might be facing some problems. Meanwhile, at the spiritual sword sect, the attacks continued. One of the people taking part in the attack emphasized that the array was extraordinary, because it remained unshaken even after several attacks. The man behind all of that thought that the spiritual sword sect had always been discreet, so he had never imagined that its protective array would be so formidable, but they needed to bring it down that very day. The attacks kept becoming more and more intense while everyone inside was worried. Feng asked if that array would really be able to withstand so many attacks. Chang Feng emphasized that the array was the ancestral master's protective formation, so it would not be easy. Suddenly, the protagonist arrived, and everyone was happy to see that the ancestral master had returned. But Yang was irritated and asked what was going on there. The sect leader went over to him and said that those cultivators had only been passing by, but somehow they had set their eyes on the spiritual sword sect's protective array. Qing Yao asked which sect dared to offend them. Yang thought that those idiots had been very unlucky because they had gone there only to reserve a spot in the cemetery. Since he was in the middle of preparing for his wedding, he had to deal with those idiots as quickly as possible. He asked the others to take very good care of the Imperial Counselor because he would be right back. He went over to the group of cultivators and asked why those idiots were causing trouble. One of the cultivators became irritated and asked how a brat like the protagonist dared to insult the Feng Yun sect, questioning whether he was not afraid of dying. The cultivator ordered the protagonist to go back immediately and tell his master to hand over the protective array because if that did not happen, when the array fell, they would not leave even a single man alive inside. The protagonist asked if they were there only to kill, rob, and destroy, because apparently all the lackeys would entertain him. He thought that all the others there were just disposable, so perhaps they were there only to be eliminated. The leader told the protagonist that that small sect did not deserve that array, and if they could not take it, others would, so it was better for him to hand it over obediently. That way, they might even leave the protagonist's corpse intact. The protagonist asked the system to check the cultivation level of the two idiots on the other side. Ying said that one was an emperor at the second stage, the second was at the peak of the immortal king realm, and the other was a perfect immortal. Yang could not believe that those useless people still dared to act so shamelessly in front of him with such an insignificant level. But this was a great opportunity because he still had not used the Saint Grade sword technique, so he could test it immediately. He opened the system, found and learned the sword technique, immediately receiving the reward. The sword of the 9 tribulations of heaven and earth reached perfect mastery. He also found and learned the 9 heavenly profound swords technique, raising it to the maximum as well. Yang held his sword and said that he would give them 10 seconds to disappear, otherwise they would all be eliminated instantly. The group leader became irritated, saying that the sect masters of the protagonist sect spoke to him as a venerable one, so he could not believe that after 200 years the spiritual sword sect had produced a useless brat like the protagonist. However, one of the disciples told his master that there was no need to waste words on someone as useless as that. They only needed to eliminate him and then destroy the sect, but the protagonist cut him in half with a single strike, pulverizing his body. The leader was frightened, shouting for his disciple, and asked how the protagonist dared to attack the Feng Yun sect. But Yang had already run out of patience and said that they had offended his sect, and that was an unforgivable act, which meant they had just met death. The leader, irritated, said that the protagonist had killed his disciple, so he, Lingji Zhenren, would eliminate the protagonist and completely eradicate the sect. Yang asked if he really had the ability to do that, because if that was the occasion, then he would also be sent to hell along with his disciple. One of the young men asked his senior brother not to act impulsively, because the protagonist was at least at the Great Emperor stage and they needed to act cautiously. Zhenren said that they needed to quickly set up the boundless formation of the 3 realms to eliminate that idiot and avenge his disciple. They began preparing for the attack, activating the boundless formation. The protagonist's realm dropped to the initial Immortal King stage and Zhenren tried to attack, saying that he would be killed now, but Yang asked if they really thought they could suppress his cultivation with that trash formation, because they were nothing more than great fools. With ease, he broke the formation and returned to the 4th stage of the Great Emperor realm. Everyone was frightened, saying that the protagonist's cultivation had returned to normal, and now they did not know what to do. Shenren was surprised, thinking how that could be possible because unless the protagonist was at the supreme stage, he should not be able to escape. He asked his companions not to panic because the boundless formation of the 3 realms increased their power. They could attack together since he did not believe that 3 great emperors could not bring down a simple brat. The 3 prepared to attack, but the protagonist only smiled, saying that they were too weak. He dodged all the attacks and said that he had given them a chance to run away, but apparently they preferred death, so now it was his turn to attack. They realized that things were going too far and the leader shouted for everyone to retreat immediately. But the protagonist managed to eliminate one of them with ease and appeared behind the other before he could even form a sentence, telling the young man not to worry because soon they would be together again. After he eliminated 2 of the 3, Zhenren tried to flee, thinking that the boy was too strong and that he needed to escape. Yang thought that the old bastard was very quick to try to escape, but that would not help. He activated the sword technique of the 9 tribulations of heaven, heavenly slash. Genren used the soul dispersion talisman and was cut in half. Ying said that she had detected a soul escaping and asked her master if she should eliminate it, but Yang said there was no need because he wanted to play a little with that guy's soul. Genren kept trying to escape with only his soul, saying that one day he would return and take revenge on those idiots. The protagonist returned inside and everyone thanked him again. Qingyao asked which sect those people belonged to. The protagonist said that he heard them mention that they were from Feng Yun, but they had all already been eliminated. The sect master became worried, asking what they should do now, but the protagonist did not understand what there was to worry about, asking if that sect had any experts at the supreme stage. The counselor said that the Feng Yun sect was at the Great Emperor stage, but the Yunyin sect, which supported them, had several experts at the supreme stage. The protagonist said that Feng Yun had a great emperor and that the sect behind them had experts at the supreme stage, while they only had cultivators at the fusion stage. The sect master became a little embarrassed, saying that at least they still had the ancestral master. However, the counselor told the sect master that after the Lord's wedding, he would need to spend most of his time in the capital to accompany the empress. He became worried by that news, but the protagonist asked them to remain calm and immediately convene a meeting, because the focus now needed to be the wedding preparations. Meanwhile, everyone outside was saying that the ancestral master had returned, and that the great empress had come chasing after him, which made everyone extremely envious. But suddenly, the protagonist appeared in the middle of everyone, and the people were impressed, asking if he really was the ancestral master because he looked very young. Some people said that he looked very familiar, until they realized that he was Wang Yang, who lived behind the mountains. But as soon as he touched the ground, a crushing aura took over the entire place, leaving everyone in shock. The protagonist announced that in 5 days he would marry the empress of the great Shang dynasty. Because of that, he hoped everyone there would work hard during those days and help the imperial counselor prepare the sect. Some people became worried, asking if the protagonist was trying to recruit them for manual labor because the monthly assessment was approaching, and that was very unfair. On the other hand, most of them told the ancestral master that they would do their utmost to organize a grand wedding for him and the empress. Yang emphasized that right after his wedding, all inner and outer disciples would receive 3 marrow cleansing pills and 3 qi harmonization pills. All elders would receive 3 spirit condensation pills, and he would personally mentor the most talented ones selected by the sect. The sect master thanked the ancestral master for his generosity with the pills and his guidance. From that moment on, he would be the grand master of the spiritual sword sect. He asked all the members what they were waiting for, because they needed to hurry and thank the grand master. They bowed and thanked him for his kindness, and the sect master celebrated because now they could make the sect strong again. Yang asked Ying if she could provide all those rewards. She said yes, because there was no problem at all. Meanwhile, somewhere else, an elder said that he would rebuild Genren's body. However, his cultivation level might not return. Genren emphasized that the master of the spiritual sword sect had humiliated all of them and had even brutally eliminated the 5th and 7th brothers. Because of that, he promised that he would never rest until he achieved his revenge. But the old man made it clear that Genren had not been able to defeat the protagonist with the boundless formation of the 3 realms, so the cultivation level he had was probably above the supreme stage. But Genren became irritated, asking if they were really going to swallow that humiliation and remain silent. The elder emphasized that he could not allow that person to continue living, so he had to visit the Yin sect and ask them to destroy that place. Genren thanked his master for avenging the 5th and 7th brothers. Meanwhile, in the protagonist sect, everyone was working hard to make the place as perfect as possible. The counselor went to the sect master, saying that this was the dowry list she had prepared, and asked him to take a look. As soon as he began reading, he saw that the list included the golden brocade robe, the heavenly fire-glazed furnace, a nirvana phoenix feather, and the deep sea blood coral. This made him a little frightened because all those gifts were extremely precious, so perhaps they would not be able to prepare them. The counselor asked him not to worry so much because the Lord and the Empress were in love, so those wedding gifts were only a formality. Yang entered and questioned how his wedding with the Empress could be treated so lightly, because even if the spiritual sword sect was casual, they could not disrespect the great Shang dynasty. The counselor apologized to her lord for her presumption, because she should not have made decisions for the spiritual sword sect. Yang emphasized that the wedding gifts had already been prepared and that he certainly would not disappoint his future wife. As soon as the counselor saw the list, she was impressed, because it included the divine lightning sword, the 7-colored radiant robe, a mystic ice divine feather fan, the Nine Heavens Thunder Pearl, a Phoenix Tear Dawn Jade, among other things. She emphasized that the Lord was being extremely generous with the Empress. The sect master was so impressed that he thought he had never even heard of half of those treasures and wondered when the spiritual sword sect had become so wealthy. Ying asked her master how he was doing, asking if the wedding gifts she had prepared were acceptable. The protagonist said yes, and emphasized that he needed to thank her this time because she had been a great help. Ying was happy with the praise and emphasized that those wedding gifts were only the appetizer, and tomorrow would bring the main course, because he only needed to wait and see the system's grand gift. 3 days later, some people were worried, saying that the great Shang dynasty was very far away, so how could they get there? The counselor asked the protagonist why the wedding procession had not arrived yet. He asked her to just be patient because they had just arrived. Ying asked if that wedding procession was large enough and impressive enough. The protagonist said that it was an entire fleet of dragons and that she had done a great job. The counselor could not understand how there could be so many Imperial Six Dragons carriages. Yang simply told her that the auspicious hour had just arrived and that they needed to leave. Meanwhile, the Empress was ready and a little worried because the Lord had not arrived yet. As soon as she heard a noise, she quickly stood up, asking if the Lord had arrived and if he was there to receive his bride. The woman taking care of her dress told her to be a little more careful because she could not lift the veil yet. As soon as the two met, the protagonist looked at her and thought that he had never imagined that in this life he would marry a beauty like her, and that he had definitely made the right choice by going there. He held her hand and told his bride that the auspicious hour had arrived, so he wanted to know if she was willing to walk hand in hand with him through life. Without thinking twice, she said yes. Yang removed her veil and she simply looked at her husband. The protagonist, on the other hand, was even more impressed when he saw how beautiful his woman was. The ceremony continued as they walked, and everyone wished that the bond between His Majesty and Her Highness would remain eternal, and that His Majesty and Her Highness would share endless love. As soon as they arrived outside, she looked at the carriage above. The protagonist picked her up in his arms and said that now they only needed to enter the carriage, so she did not need to be so embarrassed, because it was not as if it were a bridal chamber. She became embarrassed, saying that her husband had just married her and was already teasing her. But before they could leave, something happened. Everyone was surprised, asking what that was. The Empress asked if it could be the Xuanyue dynasty. The protagonist, already out of patience, asked his wife not to worry because he would solve this soon and come back to enjoy himself with her. The left minister and the right minister were together, but the left minister took a deep breath, thinking that he could not go against the emperor's wishes. And now it was too late. There was no turning back. 3 of the 4 generals were trying to break the formation, however. It was more resistant than before. The protagonist went to them, and Wen Yuan tried to speak politely with the protagonist, but irritated, he asked Wen Yuan to stop that, because he did not need that false courtesy, since he had the audacity to go back on his word and return to cause trouble. Wen Yuan tried to explain that orders were absolute, so if he handed over the Empress, they were willing to offer any compensation. Yang asked what kind of compensation that would be, because today was his wedding day with the Empress, and he had not been planning a bloodbath. But since the trash of the Xuanyue dynasty had come back to pressure them, none of them would leave that place alive. He took out Divine Light, the Ning sword. Wen Yuan asked Yuexin if she could deal with that first, and she agreed. He asked the 3 generals to help him with the formation. He began the formation with the flying azure dragon, the roaring white tiger, the dancing vermilion bird, and the guarding black tortoise. The power of the 4 divine beasts needed to answer his call, and with that, the formation was activated. The protagonist said that he had managed to bring out the flying azure dragon, the white tiger, the vermilion bird, and the black tortoise. But all of that to him was just a simple snake, a cat, a parakeet, and a tortoise. So they could witness him break that ridiculous formation. He asked if they really thought those little pets could intimidate anyone, because he would destroy the pathetic formation they had just created. He thought that Wen Yuan was controlling that formation, so if he dealt with that old man first, the formation would be finished. Wen Yuan saw the sword strike and became worried because it was too strong, and shouted for everyone to help him. Their attacks collided, causing a massive explosion and a shockwave. Wen Yuan felt a serious wound in his body, thinking that this was a dominant sword technique, and that, if not for the protective formation, he definitely would have lost his life in that attack. On the other hand, the protagonist was becoming more and more irritated, because that formation was being a huge nuisance. That heaven-devastating slash should have been enough to defeat that trash. Lin Lang began losing patience and asked the counselor to bring her Phoenix Feather Crimson Heaven sword because she would help her husband break that formation. The counselor told the Empress that she could not go because that 4-beast formation had been created by the Xuantian Holy Lands and was extremely mysterious. Without supreme cultivation, it could only be broken from within. The Empress remained restless, asking if they were just going to watch the Lord be bullied by those people from the Xuanyue dynasty. The counselor asked her to calm down a little because the Lord's cultivation and foundation were unfathomable, and he would find a way to break that formation. Yang was still analyzing it and realized that Wen Yuan's wounds had healed quickly, which meant that formation had some use, so perhaps he needed to go all out. He activated his Sword of the Nine Tribulations of Heaven technique, Reincarnation Tribulation. He attacked again, but the attack was not that effective. The left prime minister asked the protagonist not to be so arrogant and tried to attack him, but he also managed to defend easily, resulting in another draw between the two. He thought that apparently the only way to win was to find a way to break that formation. Otherwise, they would keep fighting there forever. Ying told him not to worry because she had already found a way to break that formation. They tried to attack again, but the protagonist dodged and asked the system to let him see the method she had prepared to break that formation. Ying said that the system had detected his strong desire to break that formation. So here was a special reward called the Eye of Heavenly Perception. She began delivering the reward. As soon as the protagonist opened his eyes, he thought he had imagined it would be Sun Wukong's fiery golden eyes, but it was the heavenly eye, like Yang Jian's power. But at least now he could see some weak points in that formation. After analyzing it for a few seconds, he finally managed to find them and attacked again with everything he had, dealing damage to all of them. Yungqi began losing his cultivation and asked what that trash had done to make his cultivation decrease. Suddenly, the protagonist appeared behind him and thanked him for thinking of him, even at the moment of his death. He eliminated Yunqi and right after that, the other two generals with only one strike each. Wen Yuan, also wounded and with his cultivation dropping, asked if this was the protagonist's true power because it was terrifying. Yang prepared to deliver the final blow, saying that now only one remained, but Juexin stepped in front, blocking the attack and leaving the protagonist surprised. She emphasized that she would not allow him to kill the left minister. He was impressed by the right minister because apparently she had some skill, since she had managed to block his attack without much effort. He asked the system what her level really was. Ying said that he had just obtained the Heavenly Eye so he could use it to check anyone's cultivation. He tried using this new ability but ended up seeing something else and realized that it really was pink, because that contrast was a little too much. Ying became angry with him, saying that he had activated the wrong mode because that was the X-ray function of the Heavenly Eye. Juexin became embarrassed, calling the protagonist a pervert so he deserved death. He was surprised to see that she really could become embarrassed because he had thought she was just a doll. She tried to attack him, but the protagonist managed to defend and saw that she was in the 8th stage of the Great Emperor Realm, while he was only in the 4th stage of the Great Emperor Realm. The two continued fighting, but the protagonist resisted all her blows. He was impressed, thinking that her strength was truly formidable, so he needed to be careful. Wen Yuan warned that Yang should give up, because the right minister had the power to destroy nations, so he could not defeat her. Yang ordered him to be quiet, asking, since when a loser like him had the right to address someone, and landed another attack, making him shut up. Juexin took advantage of that opening to try to attack, but the protagonist dodged all her attacks. While evading her strikes, he analyzed her movements and saw that her body was like a feather. Ying noticed that he was getting a little distracted and shouted for him to be careful of that woman's spear. He laughed and thanked her for the warning because he had been focused on something else and had ended up getting a little distracted. He said that fighting an empress at the 8th stage really was complicated, but that made the battle more and more interesting. Ying also became excited and told the host that she had a secret technique that could take him to the next realm, but he refused, saying that it would not be fun to cheat and win so easily, so he would keep playing with her for a little longer for now. He asked his opponent if she really liked crushing everyone in her path, but then he remembered something and asked the system if he had managed to accumulate a lot of merit points and whether he could use them now. Ying said that she had already detected that he wanted to convert his merit points. Ying issued the reward of the divine level cultivation manual called the Sacred Virtue Record. The protagonist was happy to see that those merit points would finally have some use. He asked the system to begin cultivating quickly, and Ying congratulated him for cultivating the divine level cultivation manual, Sacred Virtue Record. The merit Dharma body reached level 9, Emperor. The protagonist emphasized that, with his cultivation base at level 4 of the Great Emperor Realm, but with his level 9 Emperor Merit Dharma body, his strength was now nothing less than supreme. Because of that, it was time to have a little fun with Juexin. She became confused and at the same time surprised, asking how the protagonist had become even stronger. Yang asked her to test it for herself and find out how he had improved. Irritated, she charged forward, saying that he had been asking for death for quite some time. But the protagonist blocked all of her attacks, saying that her light was too weak. So how could she compare it to the radiance of the sun and moon? He activated his 9 Heavenly Tribulations sword ability, Solar Eclipse Strike. With a simple movement, he managed to send her weapon flying far away and quickly moved over there to pick it up. Ying was impressed to see that the spear was actually divine level, but it was damaged, so it could only release immortal level power. The treasure levels are mortal, rare, spiritual, immortal, emperor, divine, and supreme heavenly Tao treasure. Juexin began shouting at the protagonist, telling him to return her spear, but he explained that good children should not play with dangerous toys, so he would keep that spear for her. Juexin became even angrier and started acting like a child, ordering him to return her weapon immediately. This made the protagonist wonder if her mind was being controlled, because she had suddenly started acting like a complete child out of nowhere. However, he decided to leave that for another time, because first he needed to subdue her, since he had something more important to do. With a quick strike, he managed to defeat her. Ying was surprised to see that the protagonist truly had no mercy for beauties. Yang asked what the system was talking about because that girl was at level 8 of the Great Emperor realm, so they could not keep playing around with sarcasm, and he asked for help figuring out how to tie her up. Ying congratulated him for defeating the ancient spiritual puppet. Because of that, he obtained the immortal binding rope and a divine-level cultivation manual. The protagonist realized that the immortal binding rope was very useful, however. He did not know why that cultivation manual was so mysterious. Ying explained that, as a true system, she always provided him with the best, so it would definitely be useful in the future. The manual was for repairing inflatable dolls. The protagonist asked if that manual could pass YouTube's censorship level. Ying changed the title, saying that it was only a small detail. Now the book was called The Heavenly Pivot Spiritual Puppet Technique. Yang felt a little more at ease with the rules because now the name sounded far too academic. The protagonist prepared to take his new prisoner away, but Wen Yuan asked him to wait, saying that Lady Juexin was a pillar of the Xuanyue dynasty, so he sincerely asked him not to take her away because he was willing to die in her place. However, the protagonist began to look down on him, asking why he would make that exchange, since Wen Yuan only had one pathetic life, but she could be useful. He asked him to go back and deliver a message to Emperor Xuanyue, and asked him to thank him for that wonderful wedding gift on his great day. And if he dared provoke him again, then the Xuanyue dynasty would be wiped off the map as if it had never existed, along with everyone inside it. Yang released even more of his power, ordering him to go back and tell that bastard emperor that he would personally destroy that dynasty soon. Wen Yuan only lowered his head, saying that he would deliver the message. The protagonist returned, and his new wife asked him if he had been injured during the battle because she had been very worried. The counselor asked the Empress not to worry since the protagonist had just humiliated the enemy forces and was perfectly fine. Yang threw Juexin onto the ground like a sack of potatoes. Qingyao asked her master who that was. He explained that she was the Grand Chancellor of the Xuanyue dynasty, but now she was only a prisoner. Juexin kept insulting the protagonist, ordering him to release her immediately, but he put something in her mouth to make her stop talking. He warned the Empress that he had suppressed that girl's cultivation to level 5 of the Immortal King realm. So they needed to find a place to lock her up, and he would deal with her later. Yang picked up Linlong, saying that they needed to leave quickly because they might end up being late for the ceremony. Completely enchanted, she gave herself to him, saying that they would do as he wished. While they were leaving, everyone was present to wish them a wonderful life. Meanwhile, in the protagonist's sect, some people were congratulating the master because they had never imagined that the Lingjin sect had a cultivator at the Great Emperor level. But the sect master said that it was not that impressive, because the Taigu Pavilion also had a great emperor protecting its foundation. Fang was impressed because the pavilion, which normally always ignored them, had sent someone to the banquet. The other person beside him said that not only them, but even the Biluo Palace, the Chonghua sect, and the Juhua sect had sent representatives. Because of that, it seemed that the Lingjian sect was about to rise, and they would no longer be just a third-level sect in the Eastern continent. Now, with the protagonist's abilities, they could believe they would reach the status of a first-level sect. The sect master became irritated with them and asked what the two of them were talking about, ordering them to go inside quickly and greet the guests because he was overwhelmed with all of that. Meanwhile, inside, one of the young masters who had been sent was sitting with several other people. The others commented that the Lingjian sect really was blessed because they had even managed to get the empress of the great Shang dynasty to marry one of them. And maybe that so-called Grand Master they kept talking about had some kind of special charm with women. The young master began looking down on the protagonist, saying that he bet the sect's Grand Master was just a pretty boy living off a rich woman. That so-called empress was probably an ugly witch. The people around him began laughing, but Zixuan was furious to see that useless man dare insult his entire sect, but before he could do anything, Changfeng stepped in front of him and asked him to wait, because that was an expert at the great emperor level from the Golden Palace, and no matter what happened, he could not provoke him. Suddenly it was announced that the bride and groom had arrived and the protagonist walked in with his new wife. As soon as the people looked at the empress, they were impressed by such beauty, saying that the Lingjun sect had been insanely lucky to obtain a woman like that. Qingyao also began getting angry, thinking that the Grand Master and the Empress were a perfect match, so those pigs should not dare question it. As soon as Lin Lang came a little closer, the people realized that she was, in fact, the Empress of the great Shang dynasty. The young master of the Golden Palace went in front of the two of them, saying that he had never thought the great Empress of Shang would be so beautiful, so he suggested that she abandon that handsome man and marry him. Lin Lang simply said that this was the day of her wedding with the protagonist and she did not want trouble, so if he knew what was best for him, he should simply leave. But the young master moved a little closer, saying that he loved roses with thorns just like her, and that if she accepted becoming his, he would help exterminate the Xuanyu dynasty, since his influence came from none other than the powerful Golden Palace. Because of that, she should accept young master Situ. He was a renowned noble in the Confucian world of the Eastern continent. His father had become a supreme cultivator long ago, and even had influence in the sacred land of Wenyuan. Yang touched his shoulder and emphasized that it did not matter whether his support came from the Golden Palace or the Bronze Palace. Today he would die there, and there was nothing any of those idiotic palaces could do. Situ continued acting arrogantly, saying that an insignificant sect like that dared to disrespect him, and it seemed they did not know the meaning of death. And if he was truly confident, then why did they not fight outside and whoever won would become her groom? The people around them became excited, because it had been a long time since they had casually seen something so thrilling, and this was becoming more and more interesting. The protagonist said that Idiot was merely a great emperor at level 3, so he could choose how he would humiliate that imbecile. He emphasized that if Situ was really so eager to die, then he would grant his wish. The two went outside. Situ took out his flute, saying that the people of Lingjun probably knew nothing about the inheritance of a true powerhouse. That moonlit jade flute in his hands was a divine-level artifact. The protagonist emphasized that he had not expected the Golden Palace to be so generous and thanked him for gifting him such a precious present. C2 asked if the protagonist was going blind because that was his own life artifact. Yang became more and more excited because if that was that idiot's life artifact, then as soon as he died, it meant that artifact would belong to him. Situ began playing the ancestral melody of the 5 miracles, Dragon Roar over the Sea. Everyone began going crazy from that sound. But Situ could not believe what he was seeing because, with the power increase of the moonlit jade flute, even a supreme-grade person would be affected. Yet the protagonist was completely calm. Yang asked him what tone he was playing and if he really wanted to be sent to the afterlife with that ridiculous music. He attacked with the 9 Heavenly Tribulations sword, Meteoric Slash. The slash destroyed everything in front of it, eliminating Situ with a single move. The people watching had also been injured. As soon as they looked, they questioned whether the young master had really been knocked down with a single blow, because he was the son of the sect master of the Golden Palace. Yang emphasized that if anyone else dared to cause trouble there, they would all regret ever being born. He held Situ by the hair while warning the others, because if anyone tried to stir things up, they would have the same fate as that bastard. The others were completely stunned, thinking that the protagonist had completely lost his mind, because that was the young master of the Golden Palace. They thought they had come there to eat for free, but things had ended up getting out of control. The sect master asked everyone to remain calm because that was nothing serious. The wedding would continue so they could keep drinking and eating. But the truth was that he was a little worried because, out of everyone Situ could have messed with, he had provoked the Grand Ancestral Master. After that mess, Lingzhan would certainly have a feud with the Golden Palace. They returned to the hall to begin the ceremony. The protagonist looked at his bride and thought that he had never imagined that after transmigrating he would end up marrying a beautiful wife like her. Because of that, he promised himself that he would never disappoint his new empress in this life. Qingyao said that the first bow was to heaven and earth. Before she could announce the second bow, she realized that neither the protagonist's parents nor the empress's parents were there, because things were not supposed to happen that way. She decided to simply continue, saying that the second and third bows were for the couple, and now they would go to the bridal chamber. The sect master, along with Changfeng and Fang, began laughing, and Qingyao became embarrassed, asking what was so funny and why they were not doing things properly. Yang took Lin Lang's hand, saying that now they could go to the bridal chamber. They went to the room, and the protagonist sat beside her. But Lin Lang became a little embarrassed, telling her husband that she already knew what to do on the wedding night because the Grand Counselor had already given her the instructions. Yang thought that woman had even thought of that, and apparently, she really was the pillar of the Shang dynasty. Lin Lang threw herself onto the bed and asked what Yang was waiting for. He tore her clothes, saying that he could no longer hold himself back. Ying thought that things were getting far too intense. He closed the curtains, and the system became angry, saying that he should not block her view because the good part was starting now. The protagonist threw something at her, saying that wedding matters were not for children and that she needed to leave immediately. Ying kept complaining, asking what the protagonist meant by saying it was not for children, because she was only checking whether the mission was complete. During the night, Chang Feng was trying to peek. He found the sect master and asked what he was doing there. The sect master told him to be quiet and explained that a great emperor consummating his marriage was an event that happened once every 10,000 years. If they could obtain some information from it, it could help them surpass their own cultivation. Chang Feng was happy to hear that and said the master truly was a visionary person. But Qing Yao appeared with her little tool for petting the curious, asking if this was really where the two of them had said they were going to cultivate, because it looked like they were only trying to peek at someone's wedding night. They tried to make up an excuse, saying that it was not exactly what she was thinking, so they needed to talk to resolve the situation. But Qing Yao threw the two of them far away, telling them to leave immediately. She looked at the bridal chamber and thought that if only she were the woman lying on that bed, it would be better. Meanwhile, inside, the Empress was telling her beloved that she felt her cultivation was about to explode. Since she had the rare phoenix body, a great spiritual phoenix energy took over the entire place, and Qing Yao was shocked, asking if that was the power of the great Empress's wedding night. Suddenly, she felt something else and questioned what that was now. A dragon appeared beside the phoenix because that was Yang's power on the wedding night. As soon as the two finished, the Empress told the protagonist that she had never imagined that both of their cultivation realms would break through. Yang said that it was all thanks to her, because without the exchange of energy during that cultivation, it would not have been so easy to break through. Ying became angry because clearly she had done most of the work and no one thanked such a loyal system like her. The next day, the sect master asked who the fool was who had dared to ring the sect's soul bell, asking if he did not know what the 9 chimes of the bell meant. He went into the hall and greeted the Grand Master and the Empress, apologizing and saying that it was all the fault of his weak teaching, because he had failed to prevent some clueless disciples from ringing the bell 9 times and disturbing their rest. Yang said that he did not need to punish anyone. Besides, he also did not need to blame himself, because it was the protagonist himself who had rung the bell. The sect master was surprised, because he had thought some novice disciple had gone mad. But still confused, he thought that the 9 chimes of the bell meant survival or destruction within that sect, so what was Yang planning? The protagonist explained that on that day, he had used the bell to summon the entire sect. First, he would like to thank everyone for the support they had given to his wedding, and he had already prepared the promised rewards. The sect master looked back and was impressed, telling the ancestral master that he was very generous, because they had only been doing their own duty. However, he was drooling at the sight of the body cleansing pills, the harmonization pills, and even the condensed focus pills that he desperately needed to evolve. Now, the Lingjin sect was truly about to prosper. The protagonist continued speaking, saying that regarding security, he planned to personally train some of the more promising disciples to strengthen the sect's power. But the sect master told the protagonist that he could leave that to him, because no one knew the talents of that place better than he did. Lin Lang informed the protagonist that her realm had already reached the intermediate stage of the Immortal King realm, so she would like to know if he would mind giving her some guidance again. Yang said that as soon as they returned to the Yuqing Pavilion that night, he would give her special training and guide her step by step until she broke through again. Lin Lang was impressed and even a little embarrassed after hearing all of that. She shouted, saying that he was being far too bold and that this was not the proper place for that kind of comment. Qing Yao, who was also present, became embarrassed, wondering if that was something she should be hearing. Ying also thought that her host was shameless, because apparently he could not even wait to do that behind closed doors. A short time later, the sect master returned and told the protagonist that he had already brought all the promising disciples. But as soon as he looked ahead and saw that he had brought several disciples, Yang asked Wuya if he had not told him to find the promising disciples, so why had he brought all the peak elders? Wuya explained to the protagonist that the sect always valued talent above all else. If they were not skilled, they would not have reached the rank of elder. The protagonist used his ability to see their talent levels, which were mortal, transcendent, spiritual genius, immortal essence, sacred body, and innate Tao body. As soon as he analyzed everyone's levels and talents, he thought that Wuya really had not been lying because for the sect to have someone like Qing Yao with a sacred body was practically a miracle. He said that he had few strong cards to use and the gap between cultivation realms was far too large, so forming a solid team would be difficult. Lin Lang asked him not to be discouraged because when she returned, she would issue an imperial decree to recruit talented disciples for Lingjin's training. This made the protagonist excited, saying that the great Shang dynasty had many citizens, and there was a high chance that there would be a chosen one, or someone destined for cultivation. Ying appeared, saying that the host had shown a desire to find a chosen one, and the task reward was a gift package of cultivation techniques. He looked at all the books and asked the system what exactly that was. She apologized, saying that it was only a system error, but that she had already fixed everything. He said that the origin of return technique could replace the sect's foundation method, so Zixuan and all his fellow disciples should focus on mastering it. And for the elders, they should cultivate the 9 profound layers abilities and focus on breaking through the great ascension to achieve immortality soon. Zixuan thanked the Grand Ancestral Master, saying that he would train as much as possible and live up to his expectations. Wuya, Fang, and Chang Feng were arguing to see who would learn that technique first. Qing Yao asked them if they could not act with a little dignity because the Grand Master was watching. The protagonist threw a manual and she was surprised, asking if that was for her. Yang explained that if she could master the goddess immortal melody technique, her cultivation could rival that of a supreme. Ying told the protagonist that he had very good taste because that goddess immortal melody technique was perfect for a sacred body or a mystical body like hers. Qing Yao fell to her knees and began thanking him after hearing that she would rival a supreme. This made her think that the Grand Ancestral Master truly cared about her, because he had even gifted her a supreme-level technique. The Empress looked at her husband and thought that perhaps this meant she was officially part of the Lingjun sect. Yang handed her the manual, but that one was different, and it was called a sutra. She asked what it was. The protagonist said that everyone had received a gift, so how could he forget his beloved? He emphasized that the book, called the Kama Sutra, had been created by an ancient saint, and he thought it suited the two of them perfectly. Lin Lang became excited and curious, saying that she would take a look at what was so special about that technique. But as soon as she looked, she was surprised. She looked at her husband and said that the book was truly profound, so he should save that night to test its mysteries with her. He laughed, saying that if she asked so sweetly, then he could not refuse. She hugged him, celebrating that she had also received a gift. Meanwhile, in the Golden Palace, a woman was calling for Situ Xiaocheng. A subordinate went to Minghui, saying that the sect master had ordered that no one disturb him, no matter what happened. But she kept shouting, saying that Xiaocheng was filthy because his son had been eliminated, and yet he could still sit there doing nothing. The subordinate remained worried, telling her not to shout because he knew she was suffering, but the master was suffering too. Besides, he was in the middle of a crucial breakthrough, and if he lost focus and suffered a backlash, the entire Golden Palace could collapse. Ming Hui remained completely out of control and emphasized that if the Golden Palace had no heart, then she herself would avenge her son. She left at high speed, thinking that if that heartless old ghost Xiao Cheng would not act, then she would find someone who could help. Sometime later in the Lingjian sect, the people were worried because they had heard a noise and felt an extremely strong pressure. Inside, the protagonist was teaching Qing Yao how to wield a sword. Suddenly, he heard a very loud noise coming from outside. Someone was insulting the entire sect and ordering someone to appear. The protagonist was surprised and asked whether the sect's protective array was under attack again. The Empress warned her husband that the visitor seemed extremely hostile, so she was worried. Yang asked her not to be afraid because he would go see which idiot had come to challenge them this time. Qing Yao asked who was blind enough to cause trouble for the Lingjin sect. She asked the protagonist to let her go out and tear apart the mouth of that bastard causing trouble. The protagonist explained that the visitors meant nothing good, so she needed to stay there and take care of the Empress, and he would be back soon. Meanwhile, above the array, Ming Hui was irritated, saying that that man could not even deal with the formation of a small sect. So what use was he? The man explained that this small sect actually had the formation of a great sect, and it was very complicated because it looked nothing like a ninth-rate sect. The protagonist appeared before them, saying that if they did not possess the realm of supremacy, they did not even need to waste their efforts, because they would not be able to break through the barrier. The man stepped in front of Ming Hui, asking where that stinking brat had come from and saying that if the protagonist was not careful, he would die along with that sect. Yang said that he had never changed his given name, much less his surname. He was the great elder of the Lingjian sect. Ming Hui became furious after hearing the protagonist's name and said that now he would pay with his life for her son's death. But the man asked her not to act so impulsively because he could deal with that bastard. The protagonist began laughing, saying that the woman was a nun and the man was a Taoist, while that useless guy's father was the sect master of the Golden Palace of Confucianism. He asked if that was a rigid Confucian who had kidnapped a messy Taoist nun, because her relationships were truly confusing, enough to make one's body and hair shiver. The man became furious, ordered Yang to shut up, and introduced himself, saying that he was Hermit Tianquan and that he would definitely cut him into 1,000 pieces. But the protagonist kept mocking him. Tianquan became furious and tried to attack him, but the protagonist defended himself with ease. Tianquan asked how that was possible because the protagonist had silently absorbed his sword moves, and perhaps that brat had already reached the realm of supremacy. Yang emphasized that he could understand that woman's feelings, but suggested that they end that matter immediately. Tianquan, worried, tried to convince Minghui to withdraw, but she told him to shut up and said that he had no heart because it was her son who had died there. Minghui gathered her courage again and said that today he would not only eliminate all of Lingjian, but also cripple that bitch Lin Lang and marry her to her son in a ghost wedding. This made the protagonist furious, and the system noticed that his killing intent had returned again. Yang took out his sword, saying that he used to think that cutting the grass by the roots in novels was unnecessary, but today was an exception. Tianquan was frightened and asked what exactly he wanted to do. Yang said that he would send the two of them to accompany Situ so the family would be reunited again. Ying said that she had detected the host's desire to help people reunite, immediately issuing a saint-grade cultivation technique called the Divine Transformation Art of the Three Souls. She said that there was a reward and asked if he was not going to check it, but Yang ignored the system, saying that he would eliminate those idle fools, starting with the nun. Tianquan tried to defend, but the attack was so strong that even using all his defense, he still suffered severe damage. Minghui became furious, saying that apparently he had made no progress all these years since he could not defeat a mere brat. Tianquan explained to her that to defeat that person, they would have to use combined swordsmanship. The two prepared to attack and charge towards the protagonist, but he thought that it was simply shameful because they even had a combined sword move like a pair of adulterous lovers. Ying asked the protagonist why he did not use the new cultivation technique to deal with them. Yang asked if the divine transformation art of the three souls was not just a chi technique that manifested the three pure ones. Ying explained that it was basically that, but since they were using combined swordsmanship, he could also use a 3 against 2. The protagonist began laughing, leaving the two of them surprised. Suddenly, two more Yangs appeared. Tianquan became worried, asking what kind of evil cultivation technique that was. Minghui told him that it had to be just an illusion, because only one was the real body, so there was nothing to fear. But the three protagonists began attacking simultaneously. Tianquan blocked one attack, but thought that the power of that sword move was extremely profound, so the protagonist really had to be in the realm of supremacy. Minghui could not even defend against the first attack. Tianquan realized that she was injured and tried to go help her. He managed to hold her before she began to fall. He realized that he had no chance of winning that battle, and told the protagonist that he truly was a magnanimous person, so he would like to offer his life to spare Minghui's. But she refused, asking him to be quiet because even if she became a ghost, she would never let that bastard go. But Yang apologized to the two of them, saying that unfortunately he was in a bad mood, so all of them needed to die. Tianquan, with no way out, said that now that he had heard that, even if it cost him his life, he would drag the protagonist down to hell with him. Ying asked Yang to be careful, but the protagonist sensed something, and apparently that little dog was planning to self-destruct. Tianquan threw himself onto Yang's body and told Minghui to run. She thought that she should have known better than to look for that useless man to support her. A great explosion occurred. Tianquan's soul tried to escape, saying that it would be better for him to go ask Xiaocheng for help. Minghui thought that, at the very least, that heartless man was in the realm of supremacy. But suddenly she received an attack to the head and questioned what kind of secret art that was. A powerful energy surrounded her, and the protagonist emphasized that he had already said that neither of them would escape today. He activated the Flying Willow Absolute Field. They entered what seemed like another dimension. She said that if she were eliminated by him, then the Buddhist sect would not let him escape, so he only needed to wait to go to hell. But Yang attacked her, saying that in any case he had already offended the scholars, the Confucians, and the Taoists, so there was no harm in adding one more sect. Ying praised him, saying that the protagonist truly was incredible, because he had challenged the three religions of Buddhism all by himself. Yang asked if all of that had also been part of her plan. The system said no, because how could that system plot against an elderly person like the protagonist? Besides, That system had always helped him efficiently. Yang held her affectionately and said that was very good, as long as it was true. Yang asked her to stop and go back because his wife and the others must be worried. Back inside his sect, the Empress ran over to him, asking if he was all right, because that scene just now had been terrifying. Qingyao thought that the Great Elder was truly incredible, because he had managed to defeat those invading enemies again without much difficulty. Yang said that the problem just now had been solved without much effort because it was nothing serious. Wuya asked who exactly those invaders were. Yang explained that it was Situ's mother who had caused trouble yesterday. She had brought a little dog named Tianquan, but he had not been very lucky. Wuya was surprised, asking if that really was Tianquan from the flowing water reflecting the moon sect and what they should do now. The protagonist asked what kind of sect that was. Wuya explained that the sect had 4 elegant cultivators with similar ideals. Its reputation was very well known in the Confucian world of the Eastern continent. But the protagonist said that from the description, it sounded like nothing more than an association of old people and was not threatening at all. Wuya was surprised again, thinking that the Great Elder's abilities were truly unfathomable. So he could assume that the remaining members of that sect would not dare cause trouble for the Lingjin sect. Yang asked them not to worry too much and to focus only on cultivating the secret manuals and mental arts he had provided to everyone. Wuya said that all of them needed to cultivate hard, but the Lingjin sect was not an important sect, and to begin with, its spiritual energy was pitifully scarce. Even if they cultivated hard every day, it would be difficult to advance. The protagonist agreed, saying that everything he said made some sense, so he suggested that everyone find an important sect and directly take its heavenly grotto and blessed land. Guys, if you enjoyed the video, leave a like, comment, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new content. Thank you.